shout out to my NISCA friends. My first NISCA conference was back in the 90s, and I feel like the sense of community that is here and the quality and depth of the conversations I experienced today are super special. So Ari, Lance, Sal, Mike, Catherine, thank you so much for, inviting me to be here. And, oh yeah, Tom. Gary, my colleague from Temple University. My name is Renee Hobbs. I'm a professor of communication at the University of Rhode Island, where I direct the Media Education Lab. For the last 30 years, I've been a publicly engaged scholar, trying to connect theory and practice by examining what it means to think critically about media and create media, not as part of a vocational program to train future media professionals, but as a fundamental life skill for every man, woman, and child in the United States and around the world. And I've had the amazing opportunity to offer professional learning experiences to educators on 4 continents. And so I have a big, wide understanding of the global media literacy community. So before I begin, I just want to I showed you a screenshot of my website. And of course, I do have to announce the publication of my new book, The Library Screen Scene, Film and Media Literacy in Schools, Colleges, and Communities by Oxford University Press. So if you know a librarian, maybe that's a school librarian or an academic librarian or even a public librarian, you want to recommend the book. And there's some flyers over here. There's a 30% discount for NISCA members. Okay. I also want to talk a little bit about the 10th anniversary of my baby, the Journal of Media Literacy Education, now in its 10th year. We just launched volume 11, issue 2, Media Literacy Education for All Ages, and it looks at intergenerational media literacy. And as the founding editor of the JMLE, I want to welcome you to contribute voices in the field if you're a practitioner, or a scholarly article if you're a researcher. We are multidisciplinary and eclectic. And every year, we get 50,000 downloads from people in 160 countries. Because there's no paywall, there's no fee, it's an open access peer-reviewed journal. So I invite you to contribute accounts of your teaching practice for the voices in the field if you're engaging in media literacy in your context. Okay, so this is the title of my talk, From Theory to Practice and Back Again, Media Literacy Education in 2020 and Beyond. The slides, the videos, and the websites that I'm going to be referring to today are available here, http://HobbsNISCA2019. So I invite you to use, reuse, improve, modify, remix the materials that I'm sharing with you today. Let's start with this. These targeted ads make me feel like I'm being watched. Ping! Notice, protect your brain from intrusion. Tinfoil headwear, only £9.99. A lot of us have an increasing awareness that we are participating in a digital media culture where we are being watched, right? Where our keystrokes and clicks are part of the equation. And so this is the topic that I want to explore this evening. Now, many of you are going to listen to my talk and you're going to go, oh, come on, Renee. We can just unplug one day a week like Tiffany Schlain suggests we do, and that's good enough. After all, she's the daughter of Leonard Schlain. You guys love her, don't you? The alphabet and the goddess, or the goddess and the alphabet, or whatever that book was. So maybe all you need to do is just unplug get a little distance from all that technology. That's enough. That'll solve all the problems, right? Why do we need to make it more complicated than that? And so for you, I totally can understand that as a coping strategy. I respect it. Once upon a time, I thought that was a good idea, but today I don't think that's what I'm going to be focusing on. In fact, I wonder about what kind of willful ignorance we're all engaging in when it comes to the digital media technologies we use every day. This is a really cool tool called Castro that lets you clip from a podcast. So let's listen to this little bit of a podcast.
You've written about how these browser extensions that we at least agree.
Browser extensions?
Do we agree to accept cookies in some way? How does that happen? Are we informed, or is our consent sought however passively?
This is a really good question, and this goes right to the heart of a big conversation we're having about technology right now. What is consent? What is being informed? Yes, lots of websites now, because of a European data law, put up a little notice on the bottom that says, oh, by the way, we use cookies. Are you cool with that? And you either ignore it or you click OK, and you don't really think about it. But does that mean that we really understand that, in the course of a week, that over 11,000 times, at least for me, that companies are going to be able to be pushing out these requests to track and follow you around? I don't really think it does. I think, in fact, that we rely on the company that makes the web browser software, Chrome or Firefox, to have our interests at heart.
So this is a really interesting issue for us to think about how we are implicated in understanding or choosing not to understand the magical technologies that we use every day. So I'm going to summarize my entire talk, so in case you want to go get another drink, and you can kind of just get the sense of it right here. I'm really just going to make 3 points in about the next 30 minutes. I'm going to argue that algorithmic personalization shapes and limits our experience of contemporary life and learning. I'm going to show how new forms of media literacy education are needed to respond to the changing digital environment. And I'm going to suggest that university-school partnerships can build a local capacity for digital and media literacy education by bridging theory and practice. Of course, one of the things that continues to make media literacy so important for me as a publicly engaged scholar is the issue of relevance. Media literacy aims to be responsive to people's lived experience with digital media, mass media, and popular culture. And from a theory point of view, we have 5 big ideas that ground this work. Concepts that are familiar to you because they represent a kind of synthesis of scholarship for the last 50 years, right? Of course, let's start at the left, political economy. We understand that all media messages circulate in an economic and political context, and you can't disentangle the messages and the systems from that political and economic context. It's completely constitutive and shaping. We understand that meaning-making and interpretation are at the heart of the practice of making sense of the world, and that we interpret messages based on our life experiences, our own backgrounds, our own cultural values, and we don't always see the same media, even when we're in the same room together. Representation, the idea of messages being representation, selective, incomplete, partial, biased. Semiotics, the idea that messages use codes and conventions. This crowd loves that. That's a big idea here. Codes and conventions shape the form and content of the messages, and we have to understand how form works to make sense of media. And finally, media have effects. They actually influence attitudes, they actually influence behaviors, and we have to understand how media influence social values as well. We call these the 5 key concepts of media literacy, and we use them as glasses or lenses to interrogate and examine issues of the time. So we could use those 5 theoretical lenses to examine this question. What are the implications of digital participation as social obligation? Now, you old people in the room, you'll say to me, Renee, I don't feel any sense of social obligation. I'm exempt from this. And indeed, you may feel that way. But we have to consider how many of us sometimes feel we have no choice but to participate in the digital context, that we are, by being part of a community, participation is expected. For example, I could be fired if I didn't answer my email for 3 months. You know what I mean? So it's not optional. I am obliged to participate, right? As part of my work environment. And so what are the implications of being obliged to participate in digital media? Well, Marshall McLuhan would say to us, we can't even see that question because we're so immersed in it that it's invisible to us, right? We're the fish, it's the water. We don't have a clue how to make sense of this changing digital media environment. We're too close to it. Consider these 3 quotes that I'm sure you're familiar with, these authors. Eli Pariser writes, increasingly online, it's becoming impossible to escape your own point of view. Mark Zuckerberg says, a squirrel dying in front of your house might be more relevant to your interests right now than people dying in Africa. And Eric Schmidt says, founder of Google, says, it will be very hard for people to watch or consume something that has not been tailored for them. Whoa. So if we look at this phenomenon, the reality that we're experiencing now, for sure, with a theoretical lens, we could use the Hegelian dialectic. Oh, that's so cool. What a fancy sound. Isn't it cool? Philosophy. You know, they say philosophy is the queen of the disciplines, right? So let's use the queen. So dialectics, wow. It's the method of philosophical argument that involves some kind of contradictory process between opposing sides. It posits, Hegel posited that knowing is an action, right? Knowing is something that you do, and it requires heightened self-awareness and reflection. And this dialectic reasoning process generates contradictions that are replaced but still preserved over time, so that the conflicts and the tensions and the oppositions don't ever go away, right? They shift, they morph, they move, but they're never erased. Wow, what the hell does that have to do with this topic? Well, consider our love-hate relationship with algorithmic personalization, right? Isn't it cool how your Google totally responds when you do a query? You've trained that thing to know exactly what you need, right? When I type in media literacy keywords, I get completely much better results than my students. Because I've trained my Google, right? My Google knows what I like, and it delivers my results. And my students try the same keywords, and they don't get my shit, right? And I sometimes am startled with that myself. I have to look at their computer or their cell phone and go, what do you mean? You did that same keyword and that thing didn't come up first, second, or third? Well, no, it didn't, because your Google is not my Google. Your Netflix is not my Netflix. And your Amazon is not my Amazon. We are increasingly living in highly personalized worlds where we're having totally different kinds of media presented to us, customized for us, delivered to us. And in a lot of ways, that is awesome. I have much more deeply satisfying experience with being online. I'm not mad about advertising like I used to be a long time ago, because all the ads I get are like really good. They're like stuff I like, right? What should I complain about, right? I love that. On the other hand, I worry about the fragmentation and the polarization polarization that I see all around me. So that dialectic of empowerment and protection, think of that Hegelian spiral. If we could trace it back, we could go back 1,000 years, right? We've been worried and optimistic about media and changing technology since Plato. So, what do we do? Well, Cindy told us yesterday, in mathematics, the art of posing a question must be held of higher value than solving it. Asking good questions is more important than answering them. So my students can easily generate questions like, why did the shoes I was looking at on Zappos follow me from one website to another? Why do some Facebook friends never show up on my news feed? And that's a typo, why do Google search results seem so different when I use my grandma's computer? Okay, so that brings us to the concept of the data exhaust that we throw off. And that's the term the industry uses, and I think it's really interesting. There are two metaphors they use to explain all the data that they collect as part of the way these technologies are built. One is breadcrumbs. They say, oh, when you go around using your cell phone and clicking and tapping and clipping and tapping, you leave a trail of breadcrumbs like Hansel and Gretel, right? And there they are, just little breadcrumbs. Oh, blah, blah, blah. When you use Google, when you use Maps, when you use Yelp, there's the breadcrumbs. And I guess there must be some value to collecting all those breadcrumbs and, I don't know, like baking a cake with them or something. The other metaphor they use is they say it's digital exhaust, right? Like you're driving your car and like there's this invisible noxious chemicals, and it's the data exhaust that's generated by your use of these tools. Turns out that Google is the biggest, most powerful corporation on earth because there's a lot of value to that data exhaust. And most of us don't understand exactly how could breadcrumbs and exhaust have value. Like, in what ways are those things valuable? To whom are they valuable? What does it mean to say they're valuable? So, for this, we must turn to theory and to go back to our grandparents. Some of you know that I created a website called grandparentsofmedialiteracy.com. It's a website that introduces students to some of the theorists who have contributed to the field. This is the book, Exploring the Roots of Digital and Media Through Personal Narrative. It weaves together personal stories of the life histories of people like Lance Strait with his intellectual grandparents. Guess who? Marshall McLuhan, right? Neil Postman, and many others. So here's what it looks like. It's a crowdsourced website, so anybody can contribute someone who they think is a grandparent, right? You upload a picture of the grandparent, you explain what their contribution was, why their theory was useful to you as in thinking about how to communicate about media, and then people can kind of have a conversation. How do these people influence you, right? You recognize a whole bunch of characters that are related to this community here, I believe. Well, the one we're going to be talking about, you might not have heard about. His name is Dallas Smythe. Dallas Smythe was a professor. He worked in the United States and he worked in Canada. And he's kind of only famous for one thing. In 1977, he made an argument that audiences are a commodity that is produced, sold, distributed, and consumed. And that by using media and viewing advertising, workers end up participating in capitalism even when they're relaxing at home, right? So we have to think about theorists like how they might inform the way we teach about digital breadcrumbs or data exhaust. But this theory has been around for a long time.
Your living room is the factory. The product being manufactured is you.
The Media Foundation, Adbusters, Callie Lassen produced a whole series of these really interesting videos that told us that we were the product being manufactured for capitalism, right? For the needs of capital, for the wealthy. And that idea is really hard for me to wrap my head around when it comes to Google. Because, like, Google and I are so close that we finish each other's, say it out loud, sentences. Like, when it comes to my love-hate relationship with Google, it's mostly love, 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 love. Right? Like, I love Google. It's hard for me to think of them as using me, constructing me, making me into the kind of person capitalism wants me to be. That's really hard. It doesn't reconcile. Because I love Google. In fact, how the hell would I have got to Villa Roma without Google Maps? I mean, seriously. In fact, YouTube, right, which Google owns, is really into this education thing. They're quite delighted and proud that a majority of students aged 14 to 23 prefer learning from YouTube videos than any other activities, including in-person group activities, learning apps, games, or reading from printed books. Who could be surprised at this? Right? Well, this study was done by Pearson, the textbook publishing company, and they're kind of worried, right, that Google, as big as it is going to swallow up the educational publishing industry because, well, this is the way we're going. So now, I'm going to challenge you to confront your own love-hate relationship, your own dialectic relationship with Google, because we're going to view and discuss a little piece of media. So please think about that dialectic. What's the nature of your love-hate relationship with Google as we watch this ad?
I'm grateful to have been loved and to be loved now. Love liberates. It doesn't bind. Love says, I love you. I love you if you're in China. Thank you, babe. I love you if you're across town. I love you if you're in Harlem. I love you. I would like to be near you. I'd like to hear your voice in my ear. I'd like to have your arms around me. Hey, Mom. I miss you guys. Baby, we're right here. But that's not possible now, so I love you. Come on.
Now it's turn and talk with the person sitting next to you. Share your interpretation of this video. Talk it over. Thank you so much. I'll hear from 3 people who might want to reflect a little bit on what came up in your conversation. I'll hear from 3 people. Who'd like to go first? Thank you.
So we were saying how we feel very loyal to Google, and how my brother made me an Gmail before I even know what Gmail was, and we're on board with this without a thought.
So that loyalty is powerful. Thank you so much for sharing. share your interpretation of this video or some insights that came out of your dialogue?
Well, the two of us agreed right away that a big thing that came up for us was disappointment with Maya Angelou for agreeing to do a commercial for us. Because she's Maya Angelou. She's like, we hold her in such esteem, and it's a little bit like a sellout for us. That was our interpretation.
Thank you so much for sharing that. And I've got one over here. We all saw the same video, but we all make unique interpretations of it based on our experience and our background and our understanding of the world.
I have a confession. It's a public confession. I work for the technology department at the New York City Department of Education. I heard an ooh. Tell me why. So we used to be looking out for our employees in a very closed way, and then we had vendors. Well, now our vendors have offices in our office, such as Google. I work at Google sometimes. Google works at the DOE sometimes. There's no separation anymore. So when you showed the Google Apps for Education, it's not even GAFE anymore. We're all one. All for one, all are one. And schools have a choice of domains. They can be schools.nyc.gov/ whatever their school is. They can also be G Suite for Education. Is this bad? We'll talk about it later.
Thank you for sharing. So we have to reflect on why Google is so keen on getting close to the New York City public schools, right? What's that all about? So I want to share with you the work of Shoshana Zuboff. I just finished this 700-page book, and I'm kind of jazzed. She makes the argument in a book entitled The Age of Surveillance Capitalism that instead of mining the natural landscape, surveillance capitalists extract their raw material from human experience. Because after all, the ability to reliably predict your behavior is profitable. But the ability to reliably control your behavior is a gold mine. That's why companies are investing so heavily in facial recognition and sentiment analysis, because they want to be able to have a deep understanding of your emotional responses. So we have to wonder, why are all the Google apps for education offered for free? Because the data exhaust is so very valuable. Cradle to grave. Okay, so we then have to recognize that this is a very hot market right now, and people care about you in higher education. After all, the EdTech venture capital community just last year spent $511 million in K-12 and spent $590 million in higher ed focus for $1.45 billion. This is just for the products of the future, the stuff that's still being pilot tested, the crazy ideas. And almost all of that investment is going into, guess what? Test preparation and tutoring. So they're planning the future of education, right? And they're going to be heavily involved. We have to help recognize ourselves and our district supervisors and our deans and provosts about the propaganda that's happening now about machine learning in education, right? And we have to call it out as propaganda. We have to recognize it. This love-hate dialectic can be very powerful to call out the fact that we do feel loyal to Google. We do love these products and services. They are wonderful things in our lives, and they carry some real costs, risks, potential harms. So let me just make a pivot, since we're talking about propaganda in education, to the other propaganda that we've been hearing about for the last 2 years, right? I have been fascinated at how teachers at all levels, elementary school, secondary, and college, how they teach about propaganda. I've been seeking out people who teach about propaganda and asking them, how did you teach about the Russian propaganda in the presidential election? How will you teach about propaganda in the political campaign that's coming forward? And in fact, I think we might benefit from reminding ourselves about how to recognize the key features of propaganda. You can always spot propaganda when you see how it activates strong emotions, bypassing critical thinking and going straight for the heart. How it responds to audiences' deepest hopes, dreams, fears, and needs. How it simplifies information, and how it attacks opponents. Learning to recognize propaganda is more challenging now because it comes in so many different forms and genres. And in fact, let's be honest, propaganda can be found in journalism and public relations, advertising, government and politics, entertainment, education, and activism. Propaganda is part of the democratic process, and Walter Lippmann told us that, Edward Bernays told us that. We've known that as communication scholars for a long, long time. But what I found is that 3 out of 4 teachers in American public schools are afraid to teach about contemporary propaganda. And one of them is my daughter. Can you recognize? She teaches 8th grade English at Esperanza Middle School in Philadelphia. She could teach about propaganda. After all, she's an 8th grade English teacher. But she won't touch it with a 10-foot pole. And this girl grew up media literacy, right, with her mom from birth. The Southern Poverty Law Center did research and found that most American teachers are afraid. They feel like they don't know how to do it. They don't know how to begin the conversation. They lack content knowledge. They don't understand the theory. They don't know how. So my question to you is, what can you do about that problem? You, communication scholars, what can you do about that problem? Well, here's what I did. I created a website called Mind Over Media. Let's take a look.
Today, propaganda is inescapable. In a world saturated with media messages, propaganda can be found in information, news, advertising, or entertainment. And sometimes it's easily recognizable. Other times, propaganda can be subtle. Are you more powerful than propaganda? The Media Education Lab introduces Mind Over Media, an online platform for understanding 21st century propaganda. At this website, you can view and discuss examples of propaganda in print, video, or digital forms. You can exchange opinions about the potential benefits and harms of media messages. Log in to Mind Over Media by going to www.mindovermedia.tv. Take a look at the gallery and check out how people identify and evaluate propaganda that is a part of their everyday lives. Then find an example of the propaganda that you see, watch, and read. Upload a picture, a link to a video, or make a screenshot of a website that you think may be a form of propaganda. Explain your reasoning. Other viewers can comment on what you share.
But in order for it to work, you have to pay attention.
Are you more powerful than propaganda? Mind Over Media.
With the help of the European Union, we were able to bring Mind Over Media to 6 countries in Eastern and Western Europe, translating it into different languages. and having a network of educators upload examples of propaganda from Croatia, Finland, France, Poland, Romania, and Belgium. So it's a rich site. There are over 3,000 examples of contemporary propaganda, and because it's crowdsourced, anyone from anywhere in the world can upload an example. Your students, you can create a custom gallery with only the examples that are most interesting to you, like curating all the terrorism propaganda, or all the climate change propaganda, or all the education propaganda. So it's a really flexible tool, and we're having a lot of fun with it. What we're discovering is that when students encounter foreign propaganda, they have a million questions, right? Why is it in Romania that they put no gay marriage flyers in the rye bread at the grocery store? What the hell? Exactly. So they have a million questions. Why rye bread, right? So it's just so fascinating to see students who didn't think they were interested in Romania at all look at the anti-gay rights propaganda coming out of Romania, and now they have a million questions. And then they come back the next day and say, guess what I learned about Romania? I learned blah, 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 blah. Who knew you were interested? Well, remember what propaganda does. It evokes strong emotions. It relates to your deepest hopes, fears, and dreams. It simplifies information, and it attacks opponents. So we think it actually promotes intellectual curiosity that can be absolutely vital for inquiry, learning of all kinds. So I'm going to conclude now with a challenge to you. Cindy told you that next week is Media Literacy Week. We're so happy and proud about that. And since Cindy and I were on the founding board of the organization that sponsors this thing, we're like the grandmothers of media literacy in a lot of ways, right? But here's something kind of cool for the youngins in the room, and for people who can imagine their own identities as activists and as change agents wherever you are. 2 weeks ago, both the House and the Senate introduced this bill into Congress. The Digital Citizenship and Media Literacy Bill would allocate $20 million a year to school districts if they initiate media literacy projects, if they form advisory committees with experts who can help guide how curriculum and instruction would look like, how theory and practice could connect. Now, $20 million in a country as big as this won't go very far, so there will be some fierce competition for those grants. And maybe this bill won't pass this year. After all, we've got a few things to deal with, right? What with the election and all. But eventually, there will be federal investment in media literacy, because the congressmen and women who wrote this bill said, our children have to learn to recognize disinformation and propaganda as a fundamental dimension of citizenship. And we can't just think that's going to happen magically. It's not going to happen magically. It has to happen through teaching and learning activities. So when members of Congress say that, I feel like we've turned a little bit of a corner. So maybe you'll be getting yourself ready by reaching out, like we have with Foxborough High School, right? Working with a high school technology teacher to do media literacy at Foxborough High School. Or my colleague Yanti Friesa, who at Columbia College Chicago is working with Taos, New Mexico, the whole school district, doing media literacy out in New Mexico, involving students at the University of New Mexico with high school and middle school students in the Taos school district. Or this one, the partnership between Passaic Valley Regional High School and Montclair University's School of Communication and Media. What an exciting initiative. Or the Virginia Tech Libraries Initiative with the university librarians. Or our Summer Institute in Digital Literacy. We've had 8 years of practice at how to teach adults how to think critically about digital tools and technologies. Our 8th year, we're coming to Chicago. So maybe you'll join us next summer. It's a hands-on, minds-on, week-long intensive program for educators, college faculty, librarians, media makers, and community change agents. So you can see that I've kind of made my argument, right? And maybe I've invited you to think a little bit about what role you might play in the future of making media literacy a normal part of every child's learning experience. But that's not going to happen without partnerships. And that takes courage to reach out and partner across our silos, across the gaps that divide us. It's work that takes courage. Now, what's cool about the process is that it kind of doesn't matter whether you think media literacy is a critique of media's institutional and social power, or perhaps you think media literacy is a kind of education designed to protect people from harmful media exposure, or maybe you think media literacy is a dimension of citizenship and a democracy, or maybe you think of media literacy as a kind of social movement that empowers people to talk back to media. Or maybe you see media literacy as a type of education that advances the capacity for being a lifelong learner. Or maybe, like me, you see it as expanding the concept of literacy. It kind of doesn't matter, because all those different points of view are going to be needed to do this important work. So I invite you to think about the power of collaboration, something that communication scholars know so well. Collaboration can transform our ignorance into understanding. Thanks very much.